Well, welcome to the second week of Advent, everybody. Are you happy that it's the second week of Advent? I'm not so sure myself. And here's why. You know, just as we're kind of gearing up for the crazy busyness of the holiday consumer shopping season, the church on this Sunday reminds us of one of the weirdest people in history. You know, just as you head to breakfast with Santa, you go to that office party, you set up your tree, John the Baptist shows up. Now, I'm going to tell you, for years, I didn't know what to make of this guy. But he appears every Advent. He's like the strange uncle that you didn't invite to your Christmas party who just showed up. And what do you do with him? I have wondered for so long, what is this guy doing in Advent? And to be honest with you, I wanted to ignore him. Just like kind of pretend he's not there. I mean, he has such bad fashion sense. It's really, when I notice he has bad fashion sense, it's really bad. And his diet is weird. Do not think for a minute that he's going to eat your Christmas cake. Not a chance. And his bedside manner. I wouldn't have any of my seminarians go to this guy to learn pastoral practice. You brood of vipers? You're the children of snakes? That's very welcoming. This is why this dude never made it on the front of a Christmas card. Yet, there he is, once again, John the Baptist, standing right here in front of us. And I want to suggest to you this morning that John is here because he reminds us of what it means to be Jesus' disciples. But don't worry, you're not going to have to go out to Target and buy camel hair clothing or eat locusts. But I think what John does do is he reminds us of where we stand as Jesus' disciples. And of course, that begs the question, well then, where do we stand? So let me explain to you. During Advent, we've been hearing and will continue to hear from the prophet Isaiah. And Isaiah keeps talking about the future. He says, one day in the future, God will act. And last week we heard how God would act and there would be peace. All the nations would gather in Jerusalem and God would free us from all the hostility and all the divisions that plague our world. And all the weapons of war would be turned into equipment for farming. This week we hear Isaiah promising one day in the future, God will act and God will raise up a just leader, a leader who will bring justice and peace to the world. Next week we're going to hear Isaiah promise that one day in the future, God will act to heal and restore and gather God's people. And God will be with us. Now here's the deal. Every one of John the Baptist's contemporaries knew these promises, and they also knew that none of it had happened yet. Herod was king. Caesar was still the emperor. The present age was filled with violence and war. Corrupt, brutal, unjust leaders were ruling. Sounds kind of familiar. But they believed in the promises of the prophets. They believed that one day in the future, God would act. And God's kingdom of justice and peace and love would come upon the earth. So when John the Baptist shows up, he's wearing a different kind of watch. On his iPhone, it doesn't say future anymore. It says tomorrow. John is convinced that what the prophets promised would happen in the future is about to happen. He's down in the desert dressed up like Elijah. And if you're in the desert and you're dressed like Elijah and you're telling people to go through water, those are Jewish symbols that scream Exodus. That scream God is about to act to renew us. And if you want to be part of the renewal, if you want to be part of what God has promised through the prophets, get down here with John the Baptist. And that's why people are coming to him. So John stood between the end of the present corrupt age and the dawning of God's new world. He stood right on the edge. Now, he didn't think when God's new world came that God was going to wipe out everything, because God's the creator. God's the one who created it all. No, John believed that the current age with its corruption and sin would be done away with. But all the beauty of God's creation and all the promises of God's future would be realized. You see, the coming of God's kingdom, it brings the axe of God's judgment. John says the axe is at the root of the trees that are producing bad fruit. And the coming of God's kingdom brings the power of heaven to transform everything. John's standing right at the edge between the old age and the new one. So where do we stand? We stand between Jesus' death and resurrection and the full realization of his resurrection in the second coming. We stand between those two moments. And if you look around, you'll notice there's still darkness out there. There's still injustice and corruption and violence. But with the eyes of faith, we believe that Jesus' death and resurrection has begun to bring God's future world into our world. It's not noon. It's not dark now. It's not nighttime anymore. It's not full noon. It's dawn. It is dawn, and you can just see the light of God's future world, the light of God's justice and peace and love and power breaking in and coming upon us. Just coming upon us. And when that world comes, and as it comes, the axe of God's judgment will cut down every tree that produces bad fruit. Like a farmer going through his field and looking at the trees that have sick and bad fruit. God's judgment will come and cut down every corrupt government and unjust leader. The axe of God's judgment will cut down any corporation that pollutes our rivers and streams and water. It will cut down the weapons of war. The axe of God's judgment will cut down all systems, all people who abuse and mistreat women and girls. So don't think judgment's not coming. It is. And it's going to take away all that distorts our world. But the good news is that it's dawn. It's not night anymore. It's dawn. And with the eyes of faith, we can start to see that dawn breaking into our lives in our world. Perhaps if you look back in your life and you ask the Holy Spirit to help you, you may be able to see and recognize certain people and events and moments when the dawn of God's love, the warmth of God's light and justice broke into your life. Have you had some of those moments? Can I get an amen? Amen. And if you haven't seen them yet, this is the time to ask the Holy Spirit to help you see. To help you see the ways in which God's dawn is breaking into the darkness of our world. Because you see, we are people of the dawn. We're not people of the darkness. We are people of the dawn. We are those upon whom God's light and power and love has dawned. And so we have to rid ourselves of all those practices of the night. Drunkenness and lust. Getting rid of all those stereotypes and prejudices of our world. There is no place in our lives for violent words and actions, because we are people of the dawn. So let us live in imitation of Jesus, in anticipation of his coming peace and justice and love. And let me close with one example of how to do this. It comes from chapter 15 of Paul's letter to the Romans that we read today. He says this remarkable thing. Paul says, welcome others as Christ welcomed you. You should say that a couple times. Welcome others as Christ welcomed you. Paul just assumes that Christ has welcomed us. That Christ has opened his arms and said, come to me. And he's done this our entire lives, through baptism, through friends and family, through the sacraments. He has welcomed us. Once again, allow yourselves to be welcomed into the healing and loving arms of Christ. And then you will have an experience of the dawn breaking into the darkness. Then Paul says, welcome others as Christ has welcomed you. Because Christ has welcomed us, has said yes to us, no matter what we've done, how we've lived, he's welcomed us. We are called to be people who welcome others, people of hospitality. In a world that says no and shuts people up and shuts them out and shuts them down, we are called to be people who welcome others, who offer people the presence and embrace of Christ. And it's just one way that we can anticipate the coming of high noon and bring the dawn of Christ's presence into the darkness of our world. Happy Advent.